Hi, my name is Alora, and in December 2018, I went to a shamanic healing center in Peru called Dreamglade to do ayahuasca. When I was there, I recorded some videos that were raw, in the moment, and really long, and those are on my channel, but I also wanted to do a shorter general overview of my experience at Dreamglade. So, first of all, something that I didn't really know about ayahuasca until I went to go do it was that each ceremony kind of builds on itself. So you get like a story arc at the end of it. And so my story arc was that in my first ceremony, I got my soul back. My second ceremony, I faced everything I hated about myself and my fear of death, and ultimately reclaimed my power. In my third ceremony, I died and was reborn. And in my fourth ceremony, it was a affirmation that this whole thing was a rite of passage and that I was ready to go forth into the world as this new version of myself who was ready to become myself. So in the first ceremony, we took the least amount of the ayahuasca. It was like half a shot to kind of acquaint us with the medicine. And it turns out I'm really sensitive to it. Some people don't really experience anything on the first ceremony, but I felt it pretty quick after I began to purge. And in my first ceremony, it was mostly crying and shaking and really intense chills. After I experienced that, I saw these kind of pulsating waves of color coming at me, encircling me, feeling kind of like entities dancing around. And it was really pleasant to me. I went into it with no expectations and ready to face my fears. So even though it was kind of weird, I wasn't afraid. And when I looked down, I noticed that my body had disappeared and it was just this kind of tunnel to the abyss. And even though that sounds kind of scary, I was just like, wow, that's interesting. So that was my first experience where I noticed kind of my perception was off. And then there was another moment where I was really getting into the curandero's song, the Icaros. And I was kind of dancing to it, and there were these visions happening when I would close my eyes. And then I suddenly started to hear this creepy breathing behind my shoulder, like, and I just wanted to ignore it, so I didn't open my eyes or anything. But then someone slammed the door coming in or out of the bathroom, and then I spun around to look, and then there was this creature standing here, like this kind of white hulking like creature. Well, it did that to me, and I fucking flipped out. I screamed, and it kind of got everyone on edge. And then so Stacy and Drew immediately came over. And they were like, what's wrong? And I couldn't even talk. I was like shaking and being like, there's something there, and whatever, freaking out. And then Drew, he pointed his flashlight there, and kind of like a dad to a scared kid at night who thinks they see something, be like, there's nothing there, you're totally fine. And he was really great about it. He said that he would stay with me until I was okay, and he did. And he told me that could be a representation of something like, I have come to understand it as kind of representation of my mom telling me that the world would backstab me and that people are overall untrustworthy. It was kind of representation of that. And then like going through that and being okay at the end, it kind of helped me let that go a little bit. So that's kind of this example of how they told us that ayahuasca, it kind of takes your subconscious and it puts it in front of you, which is why you can't be afraid. They say, let your fears in for a cup of tea. Like you have to learn how to just kind of face it and observe it in order to let it go, and that everything that appears to you is a part of you, so you shouldn't be afraid of it, and that you're totally safe. And I always felt totally safe, which was awesome, even though it was terrifying what you can go through in this. But yeah, so that was another highlight of the first ceremony. And then, but the biggest highlight was getting my soul back. So I didn't know this was a thing, but on our way up, when Stacy picked us up, he was telling me and Amy about how there have been people at the retreat who part of their soul just kind of goes missing, and then the shamans put it back. And since then, I've found out that this is called susto, and the curanderos, that's one of their primary jobs, is to put the soul back of people whose soul breaks off during a traumatic event in childhood or something like that. And when your soul is missing, it's kind of like you try everything, and this is how it was with me. You try everything, but you are still, like, your soul is famished because it's not whole. Like, nothing can satisfy you, and everything you try, you still feel like something's a little off. And that was where I was at. And so what ended up happening in the ceremony is that after all of that other stuff, there was this moment where I started to see lights circle the Maloka, and it was like going faster and faster and faster, and then it stopped. And then in the forest behind the Maloka, so there's a screen and you can see shadows of the trees at night. And behind these trees, I started seeing this blue tinted light appear, and then it got brighter and brighter, and then it started flashing. And then I noticed that this flashing was this triangle. And it was like a bluish white triangle with a shining kind of star in the middle. And it was flashing through the trees kind of far at first, like flash, flash, flash. And then it flashed in front of me, like right here. And it just stayed there for a couple seconds and then disappeared. And then the room, like, and everything went black. And it was so trippy because during this time I sat up and I felt really sober, like I wasn't on anything, and I was just like, what the fuck was that? But it felt really important. So in circle the next day, when we were going around telling our experiences, Stacy asked Raul, one of the curanderos, what that was, and he said that it was my soul that they had to put back. And I was like, well, did they succeed? Is it back? Am I okay? And then Stacy said, oh yeah, they say that you're okay. And I kid you not, like I really feel like something shifted in me that day. And I talked to Drew about it because I was like, what was that? Is that normal? And I would even see, so this painting right here was in the kitchen, and you can kind of see that, like, in the corner there's this little guy in a triangle, and I would pass that painting every time in the kitchen. And I said, is this guy what I saw? And Drew was like, oh no, that's just Bill. Like, he was just kidding with me, saying, like, it doesn't even matter what you saw. Like, you don't need to know about it. You just need to understand that you went through this experience, and you just don't need to know. And there's some things in life that you're just not going to understand. And we had this discussion about magic, because I love the idea of magic, like anything magical. But my whole life, I was kind of also skeptical about it. And so we were talking about that, and Drew said that magic ultimately are those things in life that we can't really understand and put us in this state of kind of like awe and wonder, like when you're a kid. And how me kind of growing up and losing my innocence was kind of like the loss of that magic. And even though I still wanted to believe, part of me didn't know how to continue on, or didn't know how to remember how I felt as a kid in that state of awe and wonder. And so seeing this guy, Bill, the triangle guy, it really taught me to remember how that felt. Like, I don't know what that is, but it's not, but some things in this life you can't understand. You have to accept that it's just magic. And so to this day, I feel like that triangle is a representation of my soul coming back to remind me of who I used to be when I could look at the world with so much love. And so that was really powerful. And that's why even on this channel, that's the logo, is this little fragment of my soul that came back. And so that was the first ceremony. And then before the second ceremony happened, so the way that it works at Dreamglade is they do ceremony every other night. So we had the first ceremony on Monday, or no, we had the first ceremony, and then we had the weekend to recuperate. And then I had this crazy experience where before bed, the night before the second ceremony, I was trying to go to sleep, and then I was doing a meditation and I saw these bright lights. And then I started feeling like there was a flower that was growing from my stomach, and it to me represented unconditional love that I felt for the people in my life. Like I started to send love to my husband and my dog Eddie and Han at home. And then I started to send love to everybody at the retreat. And it felt like I was having this crazy heart opening. And they say that at a retreat, when you're drinking ayahuasca, like she stays with you. She stays with you your whole life. But when you're in that kind of retreat atmosphere, anything can happen because you're under the influence of it. So this really felt like another ceremony to me, even though I was just meditating. So I had this crazy feeling of heart opening. And that mixed with what happened of getting my soul back during my first ceremony, I was kind of in this manic high state. And part of the reason I went to go do ayahuasca was because I was diagnosed as bipolar in April of that year, and I wanted to somehow deal with that. And I kind of fell into like a bad pattern of, I was like so high off of this great experience that I subconsciously created expectations for myself for the second ceremony. And with ayahuasca, you're not supposed to set any expectations. And it's almost like I learned what expectation truly meant to go through this experience. But so on the day of the second ceremony, I bought this dress and I thought it was going to bring me like good luck in ceremony. So I wore it in ceremony. And part of it was that like everyone said I looked really pretty in it during the day. And so I felt like I had all this confidence, and I felt like, because I've had these great experiences, what's going to happen now? I was all excited about it. And but it turns out, so the whole vibe of that ceremony was completely different, because even during the first night, I could hear the sounds of the jungle at night, and I felt like I was one with the jungle, and it was like a really powerful vibe and experience. This second night, it was raining really hard, and I couldn't hear any sounds of the jungle. It was muffled by the rain, and it just felt like the type of day where you just want to sit at home, like in blankets, because you don't feel well. And I really didn't feel well. So like, with the second ceremony, I went into it with the intention of help me reclaim my power. And, but the entire time I felt like the medicine wasn't working, and I was really, really sick, but wasn't able to purge. So it was just a miserable experience. And I just wanted to whine and complain about how shitty I felt. But Stacy kept coming by asking if we were feeling anything and to check if we were purging. And because I wasn't really doing either, like I didn't really feel it, but I was really sick, like I told him I'm not really feeling it. And so he ended up giving me more. So I took kind of a lot that night, but even after he gave me more, all I felt was sicker, and I still couldn't purge, and nothing really happened until it was toward the end where we have to do the limpiezas, which are our personal healings where we sit in front of a shaman and then they heal us personally at the end of the night. So it was almost the end of the night, and I went to the bathroom because I was feeling so sick and I wanted to try and get something out before my limpieza. I went in there and I just immediately felt so sick, and that I was melting. Like I could see my hair on the sides of my face like melting, and I just felt like I was oozing into the toilet and onto the ground, and that I had no idea how I was going to get out of there. And so in my head, I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to make it to my limpieza? No one even knows I'm here. No one's going to help me. No one cares. And then like I started thinking about like the opinion of everybody else and how like no one cares about me, and like I was worried that people didn't really care about me, and then I was thinking about like I was like freezing. I was super cold and it was raining, and I was just thinking, why did I wear this dress just because they all think I look good in it? Like, why does that even matter? And then it was just like this onslaught of thoughts like, I care way too much about the people around me. I give up my power to them, and I need to be able to get myself out of this situation in order to reclaim my power. And so through this kind of dress situation and like me being so aware that I cared too much about other people, I felt like Mother Ayahuasca was giving me tough love. It seemed like there were messages coming from her in this kind of roundabout way, letting me know how to reclaim my power. Even though, that was my intention, I didn't know that the message would come to me in this way. And often you don't know how it's going to come to you, and you kind of have to put the pieces together. So when I put the pieces together, I was like, okay, I'm doing this. And I just immediately sobered up somehow. And I stood up and I'm like, I'm getting myself out of this. I'm going to my limpieza. And I walked back to the Maloka like it was nothing. And then as soon as I got to the Maloka, I felt really, really sick again and I passed out. But at least for that moment, I felt what it was like to reclaim my power. And then during the limpieza, I was sitting in front of Raul, and he did this thing to my head where he like took the negativity out of it or something, and he blew it away. And it was so powerful that I started sobbing, and I felt all this shame. Like, I care so much about what other people think of me still, and I've been trying so hard to get rid of this my whole life. And then like all of this shame. And he basically, like, I felt his energy telling me, no, you're fine, you're beautiful, you're perfect how you are, you're human, and that's okay. And then so I was sobbing, and I felt like it was okay. And so then the ceremony was over. But when I tried to go to sleep, every time I closed my eyes, so it felt like my eyes were so heavy that they could, like, I had to close them. But every time I closed them, I would see this. Okay, so it started with this dancing skull, but it wasn't like a pretty white skull. It was like a decaying, gross skull. And it was like bobbing around, dancing. And then I slowly started to see the rest of it show up. And then the more of the vision materialized, and it was in this river of blood that had all of these body parts going through it. And then behind that were these hills of corpses, including like the corpse of my dead cat and my dead dog and Eddie and like people I cared about. And it was just this horrific scene that I couldn't go to sleep. And it was, and I knew I had to ask for help, because anytime I closed my eyes, I would see this awful stuff. And then, so I went over to Drew, and even though this was after the ceremony, and I think because I took another dose, it kind of kicked in later, like after the ceremony, and that happens sometimes. So yeah, be really careful when you take those extra doses. And I think like it really started to kick in then, because it was a really powerful vision. And Drew said that it most likely symbolized like my fear of death, and yeah, it was like my fear of death, and that all my loved ones were going to slip into oblivion, including myself. And then I kept saying that. I felt like I was going insane, and I was seriously afraid that I would keep seeing that even in the morning. And then Drew said that it's important to see it as almost like this positive thing of like coming face to face with death. I can now start living. And that's the message that I had to kind of see from it. And he was like, so maybe instead of thinking you're going insane, think of it as you're going sane. And it was a really powerful message to me, and I eventually was able to go to sleep. But the next day, I felt really depressed, because it kind of had broken open this thing in me where I could feel, I was so raw in terms of like how I felt I could I could see how I socialize and I guess just, yeah, like seeking this validation from people. It was just like really disgusting to me. And I like faced this part of myself that I didn't want to see. It was even like, Drew had asked how I was after the ceremony the night before. And then I said, she really made me see a part of myself that I didn't want to see. And he was like, oh yeah, she does that. And that's ayahuasca for you. It's that she makes you face yourself. And I really felt like I faced myself to the point where I started to isolate myself the next day. And it was kind of a great portrait to me of my bipolar self and the extremes that I go through, because I was so manic and I crashed so fast. And I was put in this observer position of that behavior, and I could see how important it is to seek balance of that. And so so then that was like the next day. I just recovered from that, isolated myself, but I learned a lot about myself. And then the next day, for the third ceremony, we all did Sanenga, which is it's another form of jungle medicine, and it's eye drops that you put in, and then it gives you like this really clear vision. It takes kind of like this darkness away and negativity, and it also makes everything really colorful and bright. And it just kind of like clears everything up for you. So we as a group did that together because Stacy didn't want the drops to go bad. So we all did it, and it hurt like hell for like 5 minutes. But what it kind of like really solidified with me was that pain is temporary and everything passes. And so I was able to just breathe through it. And yeah, like it really dawned on me that you just kind of have to observe things and let it pass. And so that was kind of like the theme of the night for me. Like I feel like that helped me learn to let go a little bit. And so for that third night, I was all ready. The vibe was great, especially because we had done that as a group. So it was like this bonding experience, and we were all kind of fired up to go. And there was so much clarity in our vision and intent. And I chose for that night for my intention to be just show me what I need to see, because I was ready to surrender and let go fully. And so as soon as we took the medicine, I felt it in like, it hit me hard. Like I took more than the previous 2 nights, and it hit me really hard, really fast, but in a good way. I was purging more than I ever had. I was vomiting. And when I was vomiting, it was crazy because this voice came into my head, good girl, you're doing great. And then I felt like Mother Ayahuasca was there, like petting my head, telling me that I was doing a great job. And then she was telling me, like, why do you hate yourself? Everybody loves you. You have no reason to. And so what I had been working through on the second night, I felt like I was vomiting up and purging out of my body in this third night. And it was really powerful because I was getting this positive affirmation. And normally in my head, there's so many negative thoughts, but this night they were all positive because they were coming from her. And it was a really, really trippy experience. But I didn't question it. I let go. I surrendered to it. And I purged a lot. And I felt so good about myself that I thought that something great was going to happen. But then what actually started happening, well, it ended up being great. But at the time, it was terrifying. I started to feel like my head was being pushed down. I was sitting cross-legged, and I couldn't open my eyes. My eyes were shut, but I could see that I didn't have a body and that this tunnel to the abyss was back. But this time I was being pushed into it by something. But I just felt like my head was being forced down, and my whole body actually did that. And then I was stuck. I couldn't move. And then this is the trippiest part, is that I started to feel like something was being thrown onto me, and I didn't know that these visions could be so powerful where I could actually have physical sensations of it. But I managed to like open my eyes a little bit and I was still in the maloka. But then when I closed my eyes, I would feel like shit was being thrown onto me. And there were these lights that were surrounding me. Like I felt like there were beings that were walking around shining lights at me and throwing something on me. And then it suddenly dawned on me that I was being buried alive. And then I got really scared. And then because I felt like I'm not going to go back to my life that I had. I'm not going to even be human anymore. And the thought that would come up. And then, but it wasn't until, so I started getting freaked out. I couldn't move. And, but I managed to call for help. So I called Drew over, and then he came, and I told him, Drew, I think I'm dying. And that was the first time it kind of occurred to me what was going on. And so I told him that, and he said at first, well, you could see this maybe as a representation, another representation of you being afraid of death, and maybe you're ready. And I was like, no, Drew, I'm fucking dying. And when I said that, he kind of changed gears, and I was sitting in this kind of crunched position, and he like helped lay me out. And he said, okay, well, if that's the case, just know that you're going to be reborn, and you gotta just let go. And he laid me down and said, just melt into this bed, and I'm not going to leave your side. And he sat by me and he held my hand, and I was holding on to his hand so tight. I felt like I was in this place, like the bowels of creation, and I could see my body decaying, like starting to decay. There was like all of this soil and these leaves on top of it, and it started to decay, and I like was slowly I was kind of like drifting away from it. And as I was drifting away from it, Drew's voice would become further away too. And he was just sitting there the whole time saying, I won't leave you. Just let go. Just let go. You're making space for what you want in your life to become who you want to be. And he was saying stuff like that, right? And then I started to get these visions of my cat who had died at her final breaths, and our dog Einstein who had died and his final breaths. And then finally my dad who had died like 3 years earlier. I was actually there during his death anniversary, because part of it was me needing to get over his death somehow. Like he showed up, and it was when me and my husband were sitting at his bedside when he was in a coma, and we were reading him Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the nurse said that we had to stop because he was reacting too much to it and getting agitated. And I remember thinking, wondering where he was and how we must sound to him. And when I heard Drew's voice, I thought, maybe this is what we sounded like to my dad. And at that time, I felt such immense peace. My hand, like the strength of my hand was like I was losing strength in my hand, and I could feel myself kind of leaving. But I felt all this peace, and I remember thinking, if this is how my dad felt, then it's not so bad. And that helped me let go of his death a little more, like make more peace with it. And then everything went black for what felt like an eternity. And later the next day, Drew said that this was like 10 minutes and that I died really gracefully. But on my end, it felt like an eternity of like darkness. But then at some point, there was this blurry light, and I heard Drew say, "You're free now." And then I didn't know he was still there because I had no feeling in my hand, but then he left. And then at that point, part of the Raul's Icaro, it started like kind of crescendoing, and I felt this crazy first of all, I felt like I had wings that didn't work yet, like they were wet wings. And I was like in this kind of vine tree, and everything was pulsating with life. And then the song kind of crescendoed, and all of these insects, they like vibrated up into the sky in the spiral, and I really wanted to fly with them, but I couldn't. And I was like, why can't I go? Why can't I see anything? Why can't I move? I'm stuck. And then I felt like I was lifted up by this presence of light that showed up behind me, and I knew immediately it was Mother Ayahuasca. And she started talking to me saying that, good girl, you're doing great, and stuff like, just because you can't see doesn't mean you don't know, and to just listen to the songs. There were times when I would go back in, like drift back into human thought, like, I wonder how I'm going to describe this experience tomorrow, or blah, blah, blah. But every time that would happen, she would tell me to just like listen, respect, and focus. Like, listen to the songs, respect the power of these shamans, and just focus on doing that, and you'll be fine. And it was a way of bringing me back into the present and letting go of that human ego. And so that kind of went on. I was like drifting in and out. Like at one point I felt like a snake gliding through this vine. But for the most part, I just felt this very like pulsating sensation of life, and like this limitless cycle of life, death, and rebirth. And then at one point I knew my limpieza was coming up, and I'm like, how am I going to get there? My body doesn't work. And Mother Ayahuasca was like saying, oh, don't worry, it's okay. Shut your body off. It's going to work when it needs to. And so when Drew kind of lifted me up to take me to my limpieza, I felt like my legs were completely new, like I'd never used them, and they were like jello. It was the weirdest feeling. And then I went to go sit in front of Lydia, and she did her song, and I just felt like this sense of just victory. Like the song that she was singing, it was so triumphant. And at the end of it, she said listo, which means ready. And then I heard Raul next to her be like, and I felt like, yes, I've done this. I've done it. Like, they know where I've been. And then at the end of it, like, there was just this rain that started pouring, this super, super hard rain. And then the Mother Ayahuasca's voice in my head said, do you hear that rain? We're celebrating you. And it felt so great and so liberating. And when I went out to go to the bathroom, I passed Mattia, and I said, Mattia, I fucking died. And she was like, that's great. Now you can work on your soul. And it was just so nice. And then Raul came out to leave, and he saw me, and then he just opened his arms and gave me the hugest hug. And it felt so good, because from that, like, from when we got to the retreat, we were not allowed to touch anybody or hug anybody. And it really kind of gets to you, because they don't want like our energies like affecting each other. And so to get a hug after not having had a hug for like days, it was like really meaningful, especially from this powerful shaman. It was kind of like this affirmation that, yes, you've done it. And it was difficult, but I made it through. And then the next morning, it was so crazy, because when I went to go take a shower, it's like my body was completely new. Like, it wasn't mine, because I was appreciating it. It was in gratitude to it, when normally like I'm horrible to it. I struggle with like self-image and self-worth, like we all do. And like, but seeing it then, it was like, wow, thank you for this. And it's beautiful. And so it was like I was new. I felt really new, and just a complete rebirth. And then I remember that day, like, Drew had said that if I have a connection like that to Mother Ayahuasca, like he helped me. I was getting really emotional telling him a story about my dad, and he helped teach me how to kind of channel my dad to really speak to him, because I was able to have that connection with Mother Ayahuasca. It's like I had this whole negative internal being, and when I went through that death rebirth experience and she came to me, she kicked out that whole negative inner dialogue that I had and replaced it with this positive, nurturing one of her. And so I still have that. Like, I can't even remember what that negative dialogue was like before, because it was like that was the old Alora, and the new one is this one who's being guided by Mother Ayahuasca and this more positive, loving, nurturing vibe. And so I'm beyond grateful that I was able to connect with her in that way, and that she's still with me. And so after that ceremony, I just felt like I had gotten everything I needed and I was ready to go back into the world. And so by ceremony 4, my intention was show me what's next. And really that whole ceremony, I didn't really get many visuals, just aside from these kind of trippy in my eyes visuals of like the life, death, life, rebirth cycle. Yeah, it was mostly physical, and I was like dancing to the music. Parts of my body were shaking, but I felt like my hands were shaking because it was telling me to finally use the power that I have in my hands to draw and do this art that I've been wanting to do for years. And at one point I was dancing and doing this, which is what I was doing during the meditation when the flower was growing out of my stomach. And this shows how everything's kind of connected. Like she would bring back elements like the tunnel to the abyss that I saw in the first ceremony, and like this flower from my meditation. And so I took this as a metaphor of, now that this gate has kind of opened to source and this power of the universe, I needed to learn how to channel that and bring that in to create this balance that I've wanted for myself, to help with my bipolar. And so it was really powerful messages of, you have gone through this rite of passage and you're ready to go back into the world. And it was just a really great way to end it. And Matia, one of the girls who works there, she like sang a song at the end, and it kind of resulted in all of the women just losing it and being like this huddled, hugging mess on the floor. But it was so great. And it was just like this really great sense of sisterhood. Like, the people that you meet at these retreats, I feel like whoever you're with is meant to be there for a reason, to teach you things about yourself. Like, everyone there taught me a lesson, and it's unlike anything I've ever experienced. And I'm going to make another video because it's already been over a year since I did ayahuasca. So I'm going to make like, an update video on this is how I'm doing now, but it's really good. Like, I don't really know who I'd be now if I hadn't done the ayahuasca. It was such a profound growth experience, and it was so worth it. And yeah, that's what happened when I went to do ayahuasca. I hope you got something good out of it, and thank you for listening. Gonna make more videos soon because I got so much to share. All right, bye. Thank you.